Next, we look at conversion disorders. And conversion disorders used to be called hysteria. That's a bad term. That's what Freud always looked at, and it tended to be associated with women who had nothing wrong with them. And it was like a disparaging diagnosis. And so what it is one or more symptoms that affect something about your body, about the way you can control your body, or about the way your eyes are working, or something like that. There's not an explanation, though. It cannot be explained by a neurological or another medical condition, or by a different mental health disorder. So again, this is a person who maybe can't move their arm, or their legs, something about their body is not functioning properly, but no one can find a reason why. And they cause this person a lot of distress or problems in work, social, and they're significant enough usually that tests are done. Something's going on. So again, we have a disorder that is actually happening with no explanation. So once again, I mentioned that Freud was linked to hysteria, and he viewed it as a psychological failing indicative of weakness in women. We'll offer some different views here. So the presence of neurological symptoms in the absence of a neurological diagnosis. And we do say neurological symptoms because I didn't show you the map. I had it in here and I took it out, but we do have a representation of the body in the brain. It's our homunculus, and it allows us to move our body and allows us to have sensation from the body. And so that's why we call these things that are manifesting in the body neurological disorders. It's affecting either the senses, our ability to have sensation in a part of the body, like I can't feel my hand, might be an example of a sensory deficit, or motor behavior, I can't move my right leg. So partial paralysis, blindness, deafness, episodes of limb shaking accompanied by impairment or loss of consciousness that resembles seizures. So we have something physically going on in the body related to either motor skill or sensory deprivation, sensory inability to experience one's body or to feel sensation in one's body part. So sensory system deficits, visual system deafness like blindness, tunnel vision, not being able to see, not being able to hear, auditory system deficits, and deficits in feeling, sensitivity to feeling in a particular part of the body. Conversion blindness, a person reports being able to see, and yet they can navigate space without any problem. But they've lost their ability to experience that they can see. Conversion deafness, a person reports not being able to hear, but yet when their name is called, they orient toward their name. So this is why they're conversion disorders. Motor symptoms or deficits might cover a wide range, but they might include conversion paralysis, I can't move my arm, aphonia, a speech-related conversion disturbance, meaning that a person cannot speak, or globus, the sensation of a lump in the throat that persists and doesn't leave. And then the seizures would resemble epileptic seizures, but they're not true seizures because they don't have the characteristic EEG profile of someone having a seizure, and they also don't have the confusion or memory loss that follows a typical seizure. So they're not seizures, but they look like seizures with all the shaking. And so those are the types that we can have of conversion disorder. It's really hard to get an accurate diagnosis. The symptoms can mimic a lot of medical conditions. So criteria used to distinguish between conversion disorders and true neurological disturbances include, first off, the dysfunction that they're experiencing doesn't conform clearly to the typical manifestation of the disease or disorder. Secondly, the nature of the dysfunction is highly selective. So it's limited to a very particular region of the body or to a very particular behavior like the seizures. And thirdly, if a person is hypnotized or put to sleep, the symptoms can usually be removed, shifted, or reinduced at the suggestion of the therapist. So if what the hypnosis and narcosis would both do is remove conscious control of the individual, and in that case, these symptoms can be shifted. So this was a psychiatric symptom syndrome that affected soldiers in World War I and II. This is what soldiers would come home with, is like coming home with this kind of unexplainable numbness in a part of their body, or unexplainable ability to move a part of the body. And this may have been an early manifestation of, now we're treating it more directly as post-traumatic stress disorder, right? But at that time, maybe the inability of the soldiers coming home, the social stigma attached to expressing anything related to psychology disorder, maybe would have left them having only this manifestation in this part of the body, this physical disorder, this unexplained physical disorder. About 5% of the people referred for treatment at neurology clinics are experiencing some sort of conversion disorder. It's more common in rural people or lower socioeconomic circles, and this might again be because of the lack of an opportunity to understand one's body, to understand the mind-body relationship, or the stigma attached to expressing concerns that might relate to mind. It occurs 2 to 3 times more often in women than in men. And after a significant stressor, there can be a really rapid onset, so it would come fairly quickly. So if the soldier, for example, was in a recent battle situation, it would come fairly quickly after that. And if the stressor is removed, often it resolves within a couple weeks. So it does seem to be linked to a stressor. It's thought to result, this brings us to Freud, it's thought to result as a result of stress or internal conflicts, so psychological conflicts. And so that's where this term conversion came from. He called it conversion hysteria. He believed that they were an expression of repressed sexual energy, and hence more common in women. So repressed anxiety threatens to become conscious, so his idea was it is unconsciously converted into bodily disturbance. So there's anxiety, it can't be expressed for some reason, it's repressed, and so then it manifests in the body. The primary gain would have, the person would benefit from this because their anxiety would be reduced and that intrapsychic within individual conflict would be reduced. And then there's a secondary gain, because if you have a physical thing going on, you're more likely to receive its sympathy and attention from loved ones. Psychological, not so much. Now, this theory isn't accepted, but some of these observations are reflected in how we still perceive this disorder, that there's a primary gain, anxiety reduced, and maybe a secondary gain, like this socially acceptable physical condition generates sympathy. We do see in the brain imaging, so I know these images are often hard to read, but when we stimulate the right and left hand in someone who is experiencing a conversion disorder, there actually is not activity in the cortex that's parallel to the stimulation of the non-affected right hand. And so we do see that there is actually a hindrance that's manifested in the brain. We would treat this kind of disorder with, we generally still try these kinds of behavioral approaches and hypnosis approaches, but we don't have a lot of well-controlled studies. It's a fairly uncommon condition, and so it's not one that has a large protocol for treatment. So depending on what the manifestation is, there might be specific exercises or reinforcements, and we might have hypnosis along with other problem-solving therapies. So there's a little bit of videos that I'll be posting up for you about conversion disorder. And there is a recent case that you'll be looking at of Jessie, who suffered what is called conversion disorder, but was pretty debilitating. for her to regain her function. And there are some conditions, however, where we have evidence of what we call focal dystonia. So focal dystonia occurs when a person repeatedly uses the same motion again and again and again with their finger. And because the person is reusing the same motion in their fingers so repeatedly, especially if there's two fingers that are linked together, the brain can actually create one pathway out of the two fingers. So we can actually have the focal dystonia is when the individual continually uses the same two fingers together, and eventually the brain interprets that they're just one finger, and it fuses that part of the motor cortex together so that the brain representation of those two fingers is merged into just one finger. And that's what focal dystonia is. And so we might have a case where focal dystonia is misdiagnosed as conversion disorder in the case of a poor diagnosis. So it's possible, even though it is in the brain, the focal dystonia is in the brain. It is an anomalous fusing of two separate digital pathways. And conversion disorder is in the brain, but conversion disorder is ambiguous, whereas focal dystonia is diagnosable if we have correct imaging. And this young woman did have focal dystonia, and it, could have been misdiagnosed as conversion disorder.